This is a Delica from Spyderco, made out of SuperBlue. One of the nice things about Spyderco, many nice things about the company, is that they're very responsive to requests from their customer base, especially the ones active on the forums. So you can often get steels used in Spyderco models simply by just requesting it, which is kind of silly if you think about it. How often can you find a manufactured product, really like it, wish there were slight changes to it, and just go to the manufacturer and say, hey, you know that thing that you mass produce in large quantities? Can you make this change to it because I would like it? It's kind of an interesting thing. In any case, SuperBlue is an interesting steel because while this is often said about cutlery steels, it is actually true for SuperBlue. SuperBlue is basically a finishing steel, or F-series steel, under the US categorization of steels. Finishing steels, or F-series steels, are actually designed to take and hold a fine cutting edge, which would be useful, of course, for knives. So SuperBlue in general has a reputation for being very easy to sharpen, not easy to grind, very easy to sharpen, and will take and hold a relatively high sharpness. This Delica has a full flat grind, and it produces a very prominent, very thin distal taper, which leaves a very fine point. In comparison, this is the saber ground model, and they're very different in thickness throughout the body and throughout the tip. This saber ground model has been flattened to a full zero grind. They originally come with secondary edge bevels. Now, the Delica and Endura models have been around for quite some time. I like them in many respects. I think Spyderco could severely use some updating to their clips. There are just some very nice clips being made now by both makers and manufacturers, and this one is getting quite a bit outdated. You can feel it in your hand, or at least I do anyway. It prints relatively readily and is uncomfortable. I don't like this feature right here, this transition between handle to blade. It's too small for me to actually do anything, and doesn't do anything productive aside push the blade forward to the handle and produce a cutting disadvantage. The other thing it does is produces a very awkward transition between the sharpened sections of blade and the unsharpened section, and that makes this point right here, right in front of the full stock portion, very difficult to sharpen. And it's very easy for that to start to get dull, for a recurve to develop, and that continues to grow once it starts to happen, and you sort of have the focus on this area to make sure it doesn't happen. In contrast, this is the ear, which you see doesn't have that problem at all, because the sharpened sections of the blade sweeps up then and produce a very clear transition, so it's very easy to get sharp right down by the heel, and you can also cut right in front of the handle. No leverage disadvantage. But in any case, still rather nice knife. Very nice knife to try out, a high carbon steel made essentially, like I said, to hold and take a very fine cutting edge. Now, as you can see if you look down here, I've had to widen out this edge bevel here to reduce the angle as I wanted it for the edge, and you can see how it's asymmetric, and this side is much wider than that side right here, and that's just because there's a difference in the primary grind. This side has a much deeper primary grind than this one, which is closer to flat. Now, what I'm actually going to do, and this is part of the challenge for this week, is I'm going to zero this knife. So I'm going to flatten down the primary grind here, and I'm going to use a 700 grit bester. So the challenge has two parts. The first one is basically what is going to be the number of passes to flatten this true zero, and then with a micro-bevel applied with a 600 grit DMT stone, what's going to be the force required to slice a piece of 3/8 inch hemp rope and a 2-inch draw. Now, the interesting thing about this and grinding Murray Carter often maintains and argues for that grinding this part of the knife, the actual primary grind, should be part of your everyday sharpening. One of the problems with that is that many modern steels, such as this, an M4, the ear, are very difficult to grind, especially using the stones that Murray Carter uses, which is a 1000 and 6000 grit kingstone, which are not very aggressive cutting. Now, to be clear, Murray Carter can often make that argument because the steels he uses are very easy to grind. They're usually were white and blue steels until recently. He no longer uses blue steels, and they're cladded. So one of the interesting things about this is, will the fact that most of this knife is just 420J1, which is a very low carbon, very low carbide stainless, greatly speed up the time that it takes to zero this knife, which again gives strength to Murray Carter's argument for the specific steels that he uses, that it is practical to plane down these large sections if you're using cladded steels, which are easy to grind. And that, of course, is one of the many arguments for cladded steels. Some of them don't apply currently. Now, it used to be the fact that cladded steels would be used because the actual steel for the cutting edge was extremely expensive and hard to find and hard to make. Therefore, you could only get it in limited quantities, and then the rest of the blade could be used for anything, even wrought iron from anchors. That isn't the case now. It's relatively easy to buy fine cutlery steels in high quantities, and in fact, clads are more expensive. But it will be an interesting experiment to try, and I've done this in other challenges before, and also done it many times, planing down knives to full zero edges using stones, so it will be kind of interesting to see just how much of a difference it makes that this is a cladded steel.